Hi everyone. So I was just watching a video by Kellyanne about the word witch and why she identifies as witch, and I'm only halfway through it, but the things that she was talking about just got me really excited about the word witch and like identifying as witch and why I identify as that term. And I wanted to make a video to talk to you guys about it because I think that word witch has such incredible implications about the people who identify as it, but also like possibilities in regards to the way that individuals live their lives and embrace certain aspects of themselves that are maybe a little bit transgressive. So yeah, I just want to talk to you guys about that a little bit. I don't know how long this video is going to be. I'll try to keep it kind of short and sweet. But I think there are just so many different facets of that word that can lead anyone, even if they're not as scatterbrained as me, onto a myriad different um, tangents. So that was the word I was looking for. So first of all, I'm a guy, and I identify as the word witch. And to a lot of people, I think that seems maybe a little bit bizarre. I mean, I know that in the pagan community, obviously people know that there are boy witches, which a term, like, that sounds so cute, boy witch. But I know that people obviously know that there are men within the pagan community who identify with that term. Um, I think more people probably feel like people or that men identify more easily with the term warlock, which I think is so stupid. So I want to talk a little bit first about like this gender binary that we sometimes enforce in the community, which I think is silly. Because I don't think that the term witch necessarily has anything to do with gender, even though for a lot of history it's been associated with women and has been seen in some ways as being degenerative towards women, but in a lot of other ways as being empowering. But I think it offers a lot of empowering benefits to people of all genders. Because if you go back to the history of witch and you understand the different types of people who were called witch, mostly it was women who were in some way transgressive towards the community. Women who were maybe midwives, who had their own careers and who were prospering by helping other women through childbirth or through menstrual pains or anything like that, where they had to deal with any sort of medicinal herbs and things like that. Women who had like real knowledge and real influence within the community were often attacked by the church, by male medical practitioners, doctors. Though I don't know if I would call them doctors back then, since the medical thing was so brand new. But people who saw these women as being competitions that they had to kind of fight against. But it also had to do with people who were affected mentally in some way, who maybe had some sort of mental disabilities, people who were physically lame. It had to do with sexual deviance, like gay men and women. It had to deal with people who did not fully conform to this idea of what gender is. So there were just a lot of people who were attacked by this concept of witch and who were punished for it. People who had a different race. There were a lot of black people who, because of the way that they practiced their religion, which came from Afro-Caribbean countries and were just as valid as the Christian religion, but because it was different, they were seen as being devilish or partaking in witchcraft, which is always seen as being evil. And so when I look at the term witch, I see it as something that is empowering in that it immediately shows people that you are a transgressive individual, that you are at least attempting to be revolutionary, that you hold ideas that are not quite as conforming as maybe other people's ideas are. And it's not in a way to say that, well, I'm so different and I think outside the box, so I'm so much better than you, but simply as a way to just say that I am not willing to conform. It's a word that has a lot of impact the second that you say that you're a witch, people know that you are different in some way, and it takes them aback, and I think it gives them a second to kind of consider, who they're dealing with. So yeah, it's revolutionary in that way, and I get a lot of power from that. I get a lot of power because in so many ways I identify as an outcast from society. This is not like a why me kind of thing, but it's just simply a fact. As someone whose sexuality is different from the norm, someone who doesn't always present themselves in a way that conforms with society's idea of my gender. I've always been kind of pushed to the side from my peers, all throughout school and childhood. I was always kind of kept at arm's length because I think people identified myself as being different, which is scary to a lot of people. And so by embracing that difference within my spirituality and really identifying with all the people who unfortunately lost their lives or faced persecution because of their difference, it creates, I think, a bond between us, and there's strength in numbers and all of that stuff. So it's a sense of community too, which is great. And yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of ideas going on with it, which I think is really cool. And like I said, I think the biggest thing about it that I really like is the transgressiveness of it. For a long time I struggled with identifying with the word because I'm not someone who practices a lot of magic. I really don't do very much with that. But I think in a lot of ways, which is a mindset, and I'm not someone who would never, practice magic in any way. I'm someone who is totally open-minded to things like that. But in a lot of ways, like I said, I think it's a mindset. I saw a really cool post recently about that, about how witch is a mindset, but I totally agree with that. I think I go through my entire life with this, I guess, archetype of the witch inside of me, of someone who is constantly trying to think outside of the box and, understand different paths of lives and all of that kind of stuff. I remember back when I was in high school, I was part of the International Baccalaureate program. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it is like an advanced program. And I was always kind of lumped in with the advanced kids because I was supposed to be like really smart and everything like that. But like by the time that I actually got into that environment, that like smarty pants environment, I always felt like I was falling short of some of the other kids who were in those programs as well. And I think it's because I just had a different idea of like what intelligence is and what it means to be an intelligent person. Whereas other people think that it's important to be analytical, and to some extent it is, and important to be solely scholarly or solely academic. I think that there's a lot to be said about emotional intelligence, and there's a lot to be said about stepping outside of the rigid structures of public education, which I think is really conforming and really constricting. I remember my advisor, or whatever he is in that program, he sat down with my mom and I because I was not doing well in chemistry, because my teacher basically said, teach yourselves, which, like, chemistry is so difficult, and the thing with chemistry, and I'm just going to complain about it for like 1 second, like, the thing with chemistry is that it is dealing with things with like atoms, which you can't at the time really see. We're kind of getting closer to being able to see atoms, but at the time you couldn't really see. It's just like these vague concepts, and I just have difficulties grasping that for some reason, without the help of like an instructor, sort of guiding me along, which I didn't have. But anyway, I was failing that class, and just in general not doing very well in like mathematics and stuff like that. And a lot of that had to do with me not concentrating in class. And so we were sitting in this like group meeting, and my mom was there, and she was all stressed out because she thinks that this is how I'm supposed to get into college and everything like that. And my instructor actually, I'm 90% certain that I'm remembering this correctly, but he actually said that I was an airhead. And, he was like a very nice guy, but like, yeah, he called me an airhead. And I just think it's so funny because it's so true. Like, I remember sitting in class one day and, I don't know, we were reading Macbeth or something. One of those stories where, like, every single year, no matter what grade you're in, it seems like you read the same story over and over and over again, as if you forgot it the year before. But we were reading Macbeth or Caesar or something like that, and I was just like not paying attention. I was in my own head and thinking of something else. And like when I get into that stage, like it really is almost trance-like in a lot of ways. Like nothing phases me. And so each kid had to like read certain parts of the play, and like finally he stopped on me, and I just kind of like looked up at him, and he immediately started laughing because he knew that I went into that place. And so yeah, and I guess, I mean, that kind of mindset does not really sit well with, I think, the rigidity of these social structures that we put up, that we enforce within our public education, that we kind of push onto the younger generation. It just doesn't work. And I think, before I started to identify as witch and like understand all these different ideas of like spirituality, I was kind of maybe a little bit ashamed of that. I didn't get like why I couldn't be like the other kids, but then I would look at them and I would see that they don't really care about a lot of things that they're learning. A lot of them who were in that program, which was supposed to be for like future world leaders and people who were supposed to be thinking creatively, so that way they could be problem solvers and kind of grow up to be, relevant to society, people who are going to fix it and help it grow. These kids, they were very, very smart. They were, a lot of them got like straight A's every single time, but they weren't creative thinkers. They were in it not to change the world, not to help it in any way, but to become doctors or lawyers or things like that. And most of them, if you ask them like, why do you want to be a doctor, the only reason they'll be able to give you is not to help people, but to make some money. And I just like, I felt instinctually that is not like the right way to live your life. You should, I think, be more involved. You should be an active participant in life, as opposed to someone who is just trying to like instinctually survive the capitalistic society that we're all living in. It just came across as very selfish and shallow to me. And as I got older and as I started thinking more about like the way that the world works and the kinds of people that we praise and try to support, they're really, a lot of them are automatons, and I don't really want to be an automaton. I want to be my own individual person, with my own ideas and my own ways of interacting with the world. And so as I moved on from that, I really started to embrace that side of myself that didn't react well to structured education, because I love to learn things. I am constantly reading and trying to understand stuff. I constantly have Wikipedia articles up. I read nonfiction like nonstop. It has nothing to do with the fact that I don't like learning or I find it boring or anything like that. But the same thing happened in like college classes, where you'd be sitting there and you'd be like rehashing the same historical stuff over and over and over again. The Revolutionary War, World War I, World War II, things like that. And it would never get any deeper than the facts. It would never go into like the human psyche and understanding like the emotional, psychological reasons and consequences of these actions within history. It would never become a deeper conversation or discussion. It would just be a bunch of facts that they would shove into our heads, and you have to take a test. And I don't think that creates active participants. It creates people who are passive, who sort of give into the way that things are. And I think that if you identify as witch, coming back to my original subject, I think if you are someone who identifies with that term, you could never be that type of person, because the term itself is defined really as an outcast, as someone who is not capable of conforming into what society wants them to be, because they are so different, because they are so powerful and transgressive. So yeah, I take a lot of power from that. I think it's really great. And I don't know if I talked enough about like the gender dichotomy that is split up in a lot of pagan religions between like male and female, and like only women can identify as witch, and men have to find some other word to identify as like warlock, for example, which actually has a lot of connections with like evil things, which does too. But I think witch is kind of coming to a turning point where it's not always identified with evil and like the hag and everything. But I think if you look at pagan religions, a lot of it is about this embracing of the feminine part of ourselves. And the archetypal witch is a woman, and it represents feminine power in a lot of ways. And as someone who has always been in tune with that, and because of that been rejected for that often throughout my life, I see it as a reinforcement of my already acknowledged within myself ideals of the power of womanhood and of femininity, and as a way, as like a kind of a big fuck you to anyone who says, well, woman can't be this or that, and if you are effeminate, then you're not really useful in the world, you're like dainty and fragile and all that jazz. It's a big fu to them. And I think for men who are maybe not quite as effeminate as I am, it can also be just as empowering to them. In some ways, men who are not like me, who are not naturally as effeminate as I can be sometimes, have a harder time connecting to that part of themselves, simply because it just doesn't always come naturally to them, or because they were never allowed to feel that way, because being masculine was so natural to them, if that makes sense. They were already so naturally capable of upholding these masculine ideals that maybe it never occurred to them how much power and how much empowerment they could receive from maybe the more effeminate side of things. By embracing this term, instead of looking out terms like warlock or things like that, it can really help them connect to that part of themselves that has been so buried under really outdated ideas of what it means to be a man. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I want to talk about. She talked about childhood a lot, and how like calling yourself a witch is sort of like going back to childhood. In a lot of ways I get that. I think when I was little, I was definitely really imaginative. She was talking about like creating all these different worlds within herself, and she'd be in class and her teachers would like contact her mom because they were worried, because she was always daydreaming and like stuck in her head and not interacting with other kids. And I think that part of myself followed me all the way up to now, that part of myself that is capable of going within myself, of almost rejecting the things that I'm seeing. I'm someone who really loves just like the beautiful things in life, and sometimes like just it has nothing to necessarily to do with like the world's cruelty or anything like that, but sometimes you're sitting in like a stupid department store and nothing about it is created in a way as to tap into that part of ourselves that longs for beautiful things. It's all very utilitarian and things like that. And I think the ability to go into yourself and reimagine your surroundings in a way that is very much like how we used to do in childhood, I think that can be a very healthy and empowering experience, to say that you reject the world as it is, and you can see a way that it can be better in other ways. And yeah, that wasn't really a fully formed thought, but that ability of my ability to reject my surroundings and go into myself and decide that I want to experience something different, something better in this moment. It's just very natural to me, and in a lot of ways, it was natural for me to come to terms with that terminology, that witch terminology, because like Kellyanne, when I was little and I would watch movies and TV shows and things like that, whenever there was that kind of archetype of witch being presented, it always jumped out at me as being really cool. Like I think of Hocus Pocus and The Wizard of Oz and Harry Potter and things like that. And like when people hear things like that, it seems like kid stuff, but I think that these archetypes exist for a reason. And I think that they're alluring and interesting and constantly being repeated within our media for a reason. And it's because it represents something that is very instinctual to us as human beings and something that we all kind of long to go back to. And if we don't have this rejection of these concepts because of their kind of them being kind of tied to childhood and therefore being sentimental or immature or whatever you want to call it, if we don't tie them down with that kind of terminology, they can be really empowering. They can allow us, I think, to see the world in ways that is creative and or that are creative, and that might allow us to look at problems in a way that is a little bit more beneficial, to look outside of the box and to try to solve issues in a way that is creative. Yeah, and just keep saying the same words over and over again, but you get what I'm saying. Like it creates a mindset that looks at issues creatively, so that way they can be solved in a way that is different from how we usually solve things, which I think comes from a very by the books kind of way sometimes. So yeah, I mean that's kind of all I really have to say about it. Basically, my thoughts are, even if you don't necessarily do magic all the time, if you're someone who is constantly, like fighting the system, if you're constantly subverting different ideas that are kind of universally acknowledged, if you're someone who has always felt as an outcast and always kind of been empowered by that concept of the outcast, someone who sympathizes with the people who were targeted back during the burning times. And I use that term just because it's the easiest way to describe that moment, which was never quite as dramatic as people make it out to be. If you're someone who doesn't gel well with the way that the world has been structured, which doesn't mean that you are somehow inferior or incapable or inept, but just that the world was not made for you. And I think that a really important aspect of like witchery is just a complete rejection of that structure as not being necessary. This is how the world has been created to be. It's not necessarily how the world was meant to be. And I think definitely if you are someone who is maybe a little bit more liberal or someone who is more radical in a lot of ways, people look at you and they think that you have no real bearing on like what real life is. Like real life is capitalism, and real life is struggling and trying to make out with whatever you can, so long as you survive. If you reject that, people see you as being childlike, as not having a bearing on reality, and as maybe even being a nuisance on other people, because they see you as if you might end up being someone that they have to kind of carry through, maybe their tax dollars or whatever it might be. And to those people, I think that, I feel kind of bad for them, because I think that in so many ways the world that we know now is not as good as it could be. And if you look at the way that, if you look how how do I word this? If you look at the short amount of time that humans have actually existed on this planet, it's only around like 10,000 years or so. and how few or how little and how and how if you look at the small amount of time that humans have been on the planet, and if you look at all of the changes that we've made within that short amount of time, and how much better the world has become since it began, I think, in a lot of ways. We've grown from feudalism, we've grown from slavery, we've grown from all of these like big bad ideas of like tyrants and things like that. Like, we're definitely progressing in a way that is better, and we still have a lot more work to do. But I think if you look at the ways that the world has changed and how, if you look at like the 1700s and you look at what the United States did, where they rebelled against Britain and started implementing these crazy ideas of like the government being ran by the people, like that was so radical back then, and it works so much better than the way that people were working government before that happened. And there's still a lot of issues with that, but it's strange how easily people accept the status quo, even though they come from a heritage and from a past that was, famous for doing the complete opposite, for outright rejecting it and creating something better in its stead. So I think of history, I think that if you recognize that that is a necessary part of growing as a people, then you can identify as witch, because I think that witches see that. They see that you have to be transgressive, that you have to be revolutionary and rebellious to get what is necessary. Not necessarily what you want, but what is necessary, what is needed to create a beneficial and nurturing society. So, yeah, that's kind of all I had to say about that. It was kind of a big jumbled mess, but hopefully you guys kind of get what I'm saying with it all. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, if you need me to clarify anything that I kind of talked about, I'm sure there was a lot of thoughts where I started them and I didn't finish them. Feel free to comment at the bottom or message me. Does YouTube have a messaging system? I don't even know. I should probably learn about that. But thank you guys for listening, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to make this video a video response. If not, you guys can go ahead and check out the Four Queens YouTube channel. It was the most recent video that she posted, 263, Witch, Owning the World, Walking the Path. So yeah, it's there for you guys. Thanks. Have a good night. Day.